going on, everybody? Welcome back to another exciting, do I always say exciting?
Yes.
Episode of am I lying? I don't know. Do I need more anxious? Another
episode.
For you to decide episode of the Viall Files. Let's call it Tuesday edition. Like, I guess a little Bachelor, a little Love is Blind, little pop culture. It's our freestyle show.
Totally. Kitchen sink.
The kitchen sink episode Bachelor off season, but jam-packed nonetheless. I don't know how this episode is going to go, but I feel like there's a ton to talk about. We have a wonderful guest with us, Allison Raskin.
Hi.
New York Times bestseller.
For 1 week, but I get to say it till I die.
One day.
Yeah.
You wrote an amazing book called Overthinking About You, about the intersection between mental health and dating.
Yes.
Amazing stuff. We'll get into that. Also, Allison, and very importantly, big Love is Blind fan.
Huge.
Also, Bachelor.
Yes,
yes.
Definitely.
So
I have a great story to share about me and The Bachelor.
Just to set up our audience, and then we'll get to Allison's story. I think we want to start by debriefing. We want to a lot of discourse around the Shayne episode.
Yes.
A lot of feelings, a lot of emotions, a lot of opinions.
Mm-hmm.
Natalie posted an Instagram story before I even woke up at 6 a.m. That Wednesday morning, ready to go. Obviously, she had a lot to say about that. A lot of people want to know if Natalie is going to come on the show. We'll have an update on that. We'll get into some Bachelor stuff. Reminder, we have a really incredible episode tomorrow. I'm very excited about. Cindy Eckert is with us. I don't know if you know anything about Cindy. She's a billionaire, for one. I'm really excited that we're going to have a billionaire walking into this room. It's just like going to feel rich in here.
Sometimes they just give you money.
That's what
Yeah.
right?
Maybe she will.
It's like $1 billion is a big number. Anyway, more importantly, she invented a drug, if I'm understanding this correctly, that is essentially the female Viagra. And we'll have a conversation around just that whole, I guess, space. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about it. I think there's an incredible story about she sold it, then bought it back. Why? I got the sense that it wasn't marketed in a way that she thought was worthy of the medication or the use case. Is there a social stigma between men and using like Viagra to be sexually stimulated versus women? You know, like it seems like the research I did on Cindy, it's just like women's sexuality seems to be more focused on reproduction rather than enjoyment. And is that okay? I think Cindy has a lot to say about that. I'm excited to learn a lot from her. That'll be tomorrow. I think it's something that my audience will be very interested in. So be sure to tune into that. Also, quick update, if for all you people who haven't, I don't know why, listened to any of our Ask Nick episodes, what an amazing time to go over and dive into your first Ask Nick episode. Justin Long returns. The original, He's Just Not That Into You. It's always kind of a fun callback. There was I don't like to, there's a little bit of tone to that to our Ask Nicks, but it's kind of fun when Justin comes. He is delightful, as many of us know, whether it's recapping The Bachelor, just having a good old chat with Justin, or giving relationship advice. He is truly a dream.
Just one of the most empathetic people on earth.
Yeah.
Like so tender, so kind.
So Justin and I team up and it's a wild Ask Nick episode. There's some voodoo involved.
Ooh.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. Someone was dating was
some really unhinged behavior.
Some voodoo. I don't know. You're not going to want to miss that. So that's out now. So go back, listen to that, and then while that's done, then the Cindy Eckert episode will probably be available. So be sure to tune into all that. We're just bringing you quality content all week long. All right, your story, Allison. Let's. We're dying to hear.
So I had friends who worked on The Bachelor, Bill and Brad,
sure. Okay.
and so they got me into they got me into the Women Tell All for Ari's season, which was super fun. We went. My mom flew out. I went with my best friend. They cut to us a lot in the audience. It was very thrilling for me. And I was wearing this T-shirt that they had that was like remember when Becca M went missing?
Mm.
And so I was like wearing this T-shirt with like Becca's face on it, and it was like, you know, a very specific shout out to that season. Then,
so you were on Women Tell All. Did you get?
Yeah, I mean, I was
in the audience.
Yeah, I was on the TV. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. Wow.
But what was really great is then years later, when they were showing Caitlin Bristow's like engagement video, you know, like when they came on to show like Jason like proposing to her
yes.
and everything, in the audience reaction box is me again from years earlier, wearing the Becca T-shirt.
There you go.
So I don't know like why the editors of The Bachelor went through audience reaction footage from
But
like,
you're wearing a T-shirt?
Yeah, because it's the footage of me from like 2018 at Ari's tell-all, but they used it in
And Caitlin didn't come out on that tell-all like with Jason to announce it? Like they just randomly used it?
Yeah, they just like used archive footage of a reaction. But it's like,
so you got firsthand, like you lived the Bachelorette essentially.
Yeah,
because
like I got to be on two different like reaction shots years apart, same reaction.
So like you personally were affected and like realized how creatively they can be. They can pull old material to.
I couldn't believe it. I thought it was all real, so I was really blown away. But it's just so funny to use me when I'm clearly wearing a shirt with Becca M's face on it.
What a weird. Let's pick this one. Why not? I feel like the editors once in a while like decide to have some fun with their audience. They must, right? Like Easter eggs and what they can get away with.
And in Paradise, they're always just having to mess around with their edits.
I think so. I feel like they used to have more fun.
Yeah.
I hope they decide to get back to having Paradise be a little bit more of a comedy.
More like camp.
Yeah. When I was on it, it was definitely more, well, there was different people in charge, but more importantly, I think there was my understanding, third-party information, is that there was more of a mandate from the higher up saying, we want to go back to our roots of just over-exaggerated drama and raising the stakes and making it seem like any real thing is, life or death or, as opposed to like campy people having fun. No, it's like we need to lose our shit over these villains and call them terrible people and then have discourse around it, which, is good for our show. But I don't know if it's good for the mental health of the people participating.
Yeah.
Not for us, I suppose, to decide. All right, let's dive in. All right, Love is Blind reactions from the Shayne episode. I was going to say like the Shayne down. Unfortunately, we'll never have Shake on. He is unworthy of this platform.
Should we show Natalie's response?
Yeah, let's bring up Natalie's response. So Natalie posted this on her Instagram story before I woke up at 6 a.m. West Coast time. So she was on top of it. We dropped this episode the midnight West Coast, so 2 p.m. Chicago time. I don't know where in the world Natalie was when it posted, but it seems as though she pulled an all-nighter. And I assume listened to it.
I don't know. I feel like if my ex went on a very popular show to talk specifically about our relationship,
you would wait up.
That's the only reason I would stay up past midnight.
Allison, you listened to my interview with Shayne.
Yeah.
What were your reactions?
Well, honestly, one of my first reactions was people with ADHD, caffeine affects them differently.
Well, interestingly enough, I have ADHD. Something I learned via comments that is a thing. It certainly caffeine affects me to the point where I try not to drink it.
But I think a lot of people can drink a lot more caffeine than someone without ADHD without it affecting them in that same way.
It seems to affect Shayne though. Yeah, I don't know. But
I don't know.
I'm not. I'm not a doctor when it comes to those things. Although I don't think I find that a lot of people like to pass off information they've once read on the internet into the comments. But yeah, I did learn that. People had a lot of opinions about caffeine intake and ADHD. But
But I think it's great that he's, talking about that he has it, that he's being open about it,
yeah.
that probably how frustrating it was for him to have these misconceptions about his behavior and about his energy and sort of feeling like he needed to clear the air about that.
Like when I was talking to him, because, I'm asking him questions, I just felt like, Shayne obviously just comes across as super high energy, kind of manic, I guess, a little bit. He had the caffeine, he talked about that. He definitely seemed like a guy who wanted to get some things off his chest.
Yeah.
He sounded like a guy for me that had some frustrations about the experience, I think a little bit with Natalie. But I personally got the impression that he still cared about Natalie and just wanted to be heard. That was while interviewing him, that was my reaction. And then Natalie put out this statement in her story saying, I always love it when they say, I know about the podcast. I couldn't help but wonder if that was like Natalie's way of
being like, I'm not giving you a single stream.
I'm not gonna let you guys know what the podcast is. I don't know if that works the way she had hoped. I definitely appreciate the plug, Natalie. I feel like it did draw people to our show.
Yeah.
So
maybe it's like, when something is a name brand, but it becomes known as the product, like Kleenex for tissues. You're the podcast.
I'm the podcast.
Yeah, you're the only podcast.
I don't know. That would be lovely. I don't know if we've reached that level, but I feel like if, as it relates to this story, if Natalie posted, I feel like it wasn't that hard to figure out. Like, she definitely sparked the curiosity of people. How does should we just read this for our audience? Why don't you go ahead and read it, Allie?
Thank God. I used to be a lector at church. I'm ready. Yes, I know about the podcast and I'm very shocked by what was said. A few things of many I want to clear up. Regarding the comment about me scripting our conversations, I never told Shayne what to say, nor did we ever discuss or plan what to say in certain scenes. I did, however, set boundaries with filming. Specifically, I asked him to not drink alcohol before serious scenes and to not share in-depth details of our intimacy out of respect for my family. I know he found this frustrating. The latter is what led to our fight in Mexico. I did not run from my conversation with Shayna on the beach. I had the conversation with her, but it did not air. All the cast members were present for this scene, including Shayne. I was frustrated with Shayne that day because I heard he said something negative about me behind my back to one of the cast members when I was a few feet away, and I let him know I thought it was disrespectful. Several cast members were present for this conversation I had with him. I told Shayne he was disgusting Sunday night because he called me to tell me he was going to bury me and drag me down with him on the podcast because I ended any chance of reconciliation, in addition to him feeling I didn't speak highly enough of him in the media. A major factor in our breakup last year is I found what I considered to be very flirtatious messages between him and other women. He's right. I haven't been able to get over this, and it is the main reason I can't get back together with him. This is something we have discussed numerous times via text these last several months. His hangout with Shayna during the premiere of the show is not the reason. We dated twice after our wedding, not 4 times. We rekindled the weekend we filmed the reunion episode, but decided to keep the door closed. Recently, we met up to discuss the possibility of reconciliation, but ultimately agreed not to date until he changed some of his behaviors. A few days later, I fully closed the door for any type of reconciliation after discovering some lies he told me. Maybe in a few days, I'll have more to say on this, but right now, I'm saddened and confused by his dishonesty on the podcast. I didn't think it would get to the point where I'd have to address this publicly, but blatantly lying about me on a podcast for whatever motive is where I draw the line.
Said a lot.
Yeah.
I posted later that day, just like I was getting, everyone sending this to me.
Right.
And I was kind of like, I've seen it. So I felt like, and then I was getting a lot of questions about like, you got to have Natalie on. It's just like, of course I'd love to have Natalie on. And so I posted a story stating obviously that I would love to have her on for anyone who, why wouldn't I?
Right.
It's like, of course.
You're not like too busy to have her come on.
That'd be a huge, I mean, why wouldn't I? I mean, from a podcast hosting standpoint of wanting to get the scoop, who wouldn't want to have Natalie
on? A journalistic standpoint.
Yes. I was in Vegas over the weekend, and I got in bed, and then I immediately missed my Helix mattress. And I said this to Natalie as we were lying in bed, and I said, it wasn't until we have the mat, and this is a true story. I always prided myself in being someone who I could sleep anywhere, and it wasn't until I got my Helix mattress that I just know bed is better than my bed. It's amazing. I love it. The best part about Helix Sleep, it's easy to get, as you can take that quiz. Side sleeper, back sleeper, stomach sleeper, doesn't mattress. They have like soft, medium, firm mattresses. They have it all. I don't know. I just love my bed so much, and it's because of I've had other good mattresses. I've spent money on it. It's not like before my Helix mattress, I was just like picking up a mattress off the side of the road that people left out. No, I was like spending money on. I've spent more on mattresses than I've spent on Helix. That's for sure. But not until I've had Helix that I've been like, my bed is the best bed. Helix Sleep is offering up to $200 off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners at helixsleep.com/VIALL. That's helixsleep.com/VIALL for up to $200 off and 2 free pillows. So if you are in the market for a mattress, there's no other way to look. Don't shop around. Just go to Helix. Marilyn Monroe, one of the greatest icons of Hollywood.
Yeah.
Well, if you love Even the Rich, you're going to absolutely love this episode all about Marilyn Monroe. She is far and away one of the most famous actresses of the 20th century. Her name is synonymous with the American ingenue. In an all-new season of Wonder Is Even the Rich, hosts Brooke and Aricia pull back the curtains on her legacy, life, and career. Much has been said and written about Marilyn Monroe over 60 years since her tragic death at 36. But what often gets overshadowed is the absolute force of nature she was while she was alive. Marilyn was a woman ahead of her time in so many ways. From the moment she stepped onto the first movie set, it became clear that it was her acting, intoxicating charm that brought her film's box office success. So fascinating. Can't wait to check this one out. Always been a big fan of Marilyn Monroe, and she's so dynamic. And I just love how Even the Rich really pulls back the curtain on these characters so that you can learn more about the fascinating people that they cover, like Marilyn Monroe. Listen to Even the Rich, Marilyn Monroe on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or you can listen ad-free by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app. While I can't speak to the he said, she said element of this, I did point out that I have heard from multiple sources, and this is true, in terms of what I heard from a production standpoint, the things that happened on the show, I can confirm that Shayne, I heard what Shayne told me in terms of the running away. The stuff that happened on the show, I heard in fact happened. Now that's
Which way? That she did run away?
That she would have a lot of conversations with Shayne prior to their conversations. I want to be careful of saying too much just because it's still third party. It's not from Natalie, but I just heard, it was like, yeah, that happened. The running away and those other stuff, like I heard that happened.
Oh, really?
Now the stuff after the show, who knows?
Right.
The only thing that I felt to be the most troublesome, because like I read this and I thought to myself, well, the only thing that really stood out to me is kind of like, was the at the end, this kind of accusation of this threat of ruining her kind of thing. Because that if true, that's kind of an ugly thing. My second reaction was, well, listening to it back, I didn't get the impression, at least from interviewing them, and I'm curious after listening to it, I didn't get the impression that was Shayne's goal, and nor did my impression of Natalie. Like, I didn't leave that episode with a bad opinion of Natalie.
No, me neither.
At all.
I also think that it was very interesting that you clearly had him on the day after a very emotional day for him. Right?
Yes.
Like it seemed like things had literally just happened.
Correct.
And so I wonder what that interview would have been like a week later.
True. Very, very good point. I did hear, because I was curious about that, and it's through third party, so who knows. But my understanding is these kind of idle threats suggested was something that has happened between the both of them multiple times. And it's not one-sided. It's my understanding, third party, is that they're both guilty of these kind of idle threats.
I think that they have a lot of love for each other, and I think
Yes.
they also do not have a good dynamic.
Yes. That was my overall takeaway. It's just like, you know what? and that's kind of what and I've said this before, what I really liked about Love is Blind too, especially compared to The Bachelor, is that they showed people. And they showed people with likable characteristics, and they showed people with warts. And not a single person on that show didn't look like they didn't come with some sort of like, warts or scars or imperfections, as we all have, where The Bachelor likes to edit it very oversimplified. Here are your heroes, here are your villains, here are your people who just say they're there to be grateful, and they look like just polished and clean, and you don't see anything bad about them. And then you see other people where they just look like complete messes. There's no like gray, it's good or bad. And what I loved about Love is Blind too, there was none of that. Like, yeah, you had your shakes who just, everything we keep hearing is like, he got really good at it. And as bad as he looked, he's just maybe kind of a bad guy. And then, but everyone else seemed like a human being, which I really enjoyed watching.
I loved it. And like, I think something that's really hard is that like, and this is honestly what my book's about, is like the romantic relationships are asking you to be vulnerable in this way that is going to bring up your warts. It's going to bring up your baggage. It's going to like bring up the parts of you that maybe you're still working on, right? And so like Love is Blind did a really great job of showing people not only having that stuff be brought out in them, but then them in real time having to work through that with their partner.
Yeah.
And you saw that especially with like the Nick and Danielle, relationship. And I think that was an example of them figuring out how to make a healthier relationship dynamic. And then I think with Natalie and Shayne, unfortunately, they just haven't been able to do that.
Yeah, because like I said, like I heard from multiple sources that there were a lot of conversations between her and Shayne prior to them doing any scene.
Yeah.
And
I get that.
So that's the thing. So Natalie said her was basically like, I set boundaries with production. I thought that was a really interesting line. And what I think is interesting is, because we talk a lot about boundaries on this show, right? And I really think it just comes down to, as an audience member, as a fan of the show, what are your expectations of cast? Because I don't think there's a right or wrong. You have Shayne, who seemed to be someone, even when we talked to him, was just like, listen, I wanted to be as quote unquote authentic as possible. If that meant I came across as sloppy and crazy, so be it. I just wanted to like go in and be in the moment and react and just embrace this social experiment. That's and I think as reality TV fans, especially like if you come from like a Bachelor side of things, we praise at least the idea of authenticity on a reality TV show, right? And Natalie is just like, maybe her version of authenticity was just like, yeah, I'll go on, but like I'm gonna set some boundaries, and like maybe I'm not willing to be my most authentic self. And is that okay? Like, it feels like some audience members are critical of that, but at the same time, like, it also makes sense.
Yeah, I was going to pose the question to you of like, how much do you owe the audience if you agree to do a show like this?
Well, it's a fine line, right? Between like like when you say setting a boundary with production, that can be so many different things, It could mean like, listen, I don't feel comfortable doing that. But the big question is like, to what degree? To what degree did Natalie sit down with Shayne before conversations of production? To what degree did she, quote unquote, script their conversations? And how much did that change the authenticity of the relationship we saw on camera? Because it could be something where it's just like, I don't want to do that, and I'm not okay with that, which seems reasonable. Or was it more detailed where she's like, we can only talk about this. I want to talk about this. I want you to say this. If I say this, you have to say that. Like, Which one was it?
Yeah, because I think there's a really big difference in saying, like, there's certain things I don't want to address. Like, specifically, she mentions intimacy as being something where, like, particularly as it relates to her family, I think it's a very different conversation to say these things are out of bounds for me versus a more curated conversational, I want to hit these certain talking points.
And it seems unclear which...
To what degree it happens. Yeah.
Like, I think something I said in my like my post, I believe that they both believe their truth.
And that's exactly it. I think you're so right. Like, I don't necessarily think this is like if we got to the bottom of it, there would be one clear liar. I think that like both of their versions are probably true in the way that they perceive them.
Yeah, because like I said, I pointed out that I've heard third parties that the stuff that some of this, at least some of the stuff that Shayne said happened. But Ayanna, she commented. I posted one of the reels, a promo of the Shayne interview on my Instagram, and she commented on it something like, "I've heard a couple lies already." So, and then the question is it because you were there from a production standpoint? Or are you saying this because, what's the relationship and the friendship between Natalie and Ayanna? Sometimes as friends, we want to have our friends back. Is she hearing the truth from Natalie? Or is it the truth from something she saw? Both are understandable. Like, sometimes we right, as friends, we want to have our friends back. And so, the cast seems to be getting involved. And
you're really stirring stuff up.
Me? I will say, I honestly kind of, when we had Shayne on, obviously as a guest, he was very giving.
Yes.
When I get to interview a lot of people who go on reality TV and come off, and it's a mixed bag because they're careful about what they want to say. They got production. A lot of these people are still under contract, so they have publicists from the respective shows coming, being like, "Make sure you don't say this." And
they're media trained.
They're media trained, and Shayne was a generous guest as it relates to like his story. But after seeing Natalie's post, I was personally bummed that it seemed to be getting more toxic in real time. Like, I didn't like that. I understood that when I interviewed with Shayne that I sent. I mean, without knowing anything about Natalie, I was like, she might not be thrilled,
right?
But I guess I didn't think it would necessarily turn into like what seems to be kind of getting uglier, rather than maybe just like, I'm annoyed that you said anything other than positive things about me, which I would understand. But I was bummed about that. Like, I'm not trying to, I don't know if everyone would believe me, but necessarily stir the pot. I want to have a good interview. I want to give people what they want. But it made me feel bad that clearly there was some toxic feelings going on outside of the interview.
Did you ask Shayne about like the quotes of that he was going to bury her and drag her down, of like if he said that or not?
Not Shayne specifically, because I didn't want to get into it, like asking him, because then it's like, then I'm repeating what Shayne said to me, and then I'm still get to interview Shayne without having talking to Natalie. I did ask other people, and what I heard, like I said, what I heard was, my understanding is via phone conversations and texts, that over the course of this on again and off again relationship, there were idle threats from both parties, which is not necessarily uncommon in some of these kind of high stakes situations. And as someone who came off reality TV, you have a combination of these real feelings between these people. Simultaneously, their own personal brand of wanting to look good and the opportunities that come with it. Both Shayne and Natalie have over 500,000 Instagram followers. It's a common conversation between cast themselves and their peers of being like, I don't really care about the followers, and I don't care about the attention, and I'm not going to do ads or blah, blah, blah. And maybe they believed saying that going in because they wanted to have like a level-headed approach. And then all of a sudden they wake up one day with a bunch of buzz and a bunch of followers, and they have managers reaching out saying, I can rep you, and money being thrown their way. And then, of course, they should take advantage. And then all of a sudden that changes their thought process in real time of how they want to approach it. They get more self-conscious. People are, they want to control their narrative. Natalie is someone who looked very good most of the show, like all of the show. I think for most of the time she came across as well-spoken and thoughtful and in control of her emotions, juxtaposed juxtaposed to like Shayne, who came across as a bit manic and out of control, and Natalie was in control. And this was kind of the first kind of layer of true or not of maybe Natalie, again, just being human, of losing a little bit control of the Shayne and Natalie story, it felt like.
Yeah, I mean, I actually didn't think that Natalie had like a seamless edit. I mean, I think whenever we saw Shayne like reach for her and be like, I need some verbal affirmations from you. And you saw that Natalie really wasn't able to give that.
Yeah.
That like she did, I think she also felt like a real person to me, where it felt like, oh, she maybe has some.
Totally. But overall, I thought she looked like just a really nice
yes, definitely.
person. Yeah.
But I liked Shayne too. Like, I think because they let us see those complexities in these cast members, other than Jake, I liked everybody,
What? Yeah, totally. I thought they came across all quite well. Just listening to Shayne talk, I empathized with just when he was talking about being with someone who seemed to nitpick at them. And again, he said, she said, we don't know, but I've been I've empathized with that, just to, being with someone who comes across in public and very like put together, and then behind closed doors, there's a lot of poking of the bear. Again, maybe that's not, maybe Shayne's lying, I don't know. But when he was describing that feeling, I was personally able to empathize with that. It's a real thing. It happens all the time. And so whether that's true or not, I just, in that moment, I was like, yeah, I know what that feels like. And if you went through that, that would be a bummer. And I think it's sometimes a feeling that when you are in Shayne's position, because you feel like that you are being authentic with your emotions, and it's just like, I just want to be able to be myself and be accepted for it. And I got the sense from Shayne that that's something he'd struggle with. And again, if what he said was true about Natalie, I think his frustration comes from, listen, I love her, she's great, but she's not perfect. It's like he wanted to be, it's like he wanted simply to tell people, she's just not perfect either. And that's the sense I got from him.
And I think this, again, like speaks to the compatibility issue, right? There's some people where if they have someone who does maybe nitpick, it bounces off of them easier, right? Like they're not going to be as affected by it. They can kind of like go in one ear out the other.
Like Shayne.
Yeah, or like, but
are you speaking about Shayne, or are you speaking about Natalie?
I'm saying if there are people that will date somebody, let's say like a Natalie, potentially, if this is true, where she does nitpick and she does point out things, and you could kind of take that, like it brush it off. Like it's like, okay, fine. Like, but I think someone like Shayne, when that does happen, he has a little bit of rejection sensitivity stuff where like those little notes hurt him.
Yeah.
And so this again speaks to like this dynamic that they've created, like my brother-in-law, if my sister says something to nitpick him, he doesn't care. Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
sure.
It doesn't affect him. Like, maybe he'll listen, maybe he won't, like, whatever. But like with someone like Shayne, when someone says something to him, I think he does feel it deeply.
Totally.
And so it contributed to them being in this bad cycle with each other because, I think maybe she was someone who would give kind of notes and like, he took it harder and that's not good or bad. It's just the way that he is.
Yeah. And there's also the element of, and we kind of saw it play out with the Oscar slap and the Will and Jada and things like that, is you never really know, like the dynamic of the relationship or the health of a relationship can affect how people react too. Like whether intentional or not, we know how to trigger our partners sometimes.
Absolutely.
We know what.
Well, we should know. And if we don't know, then that's bad.
Well, there's that. And then sometimes in the heat of the moment, we've all been guilty of scratching that itch because when we feel hurt, it's natural to want to hurt people back. Maturity and healthy reactions in relationships stops us from doing that. But I think if we're all honest, at some point, in our life, we've probably been guilty of saying something that we knew would upset our partner. And the big question is, especially in breakups, we see those type of behaviors escalating because both parties are often hurting. And that's where I feel bad for both of Natalie and Shayne.
Exactly.
It seems like both parties have some hurt and some sadness about the relationship and the experience. And right now you're seeing both parties probably being guilty of, while trying to protect themselves, even though they might not mean it and they say they don't want to hurt the other person, there's a little bit of that going on, it seems like.
Yeah, and that's part of what's tricky is like, I think people that, are maybe coming into the show like this or whatever, it's like it takes a lot of work to be able to have a healthy relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe not everyone's there yet. Like it takes time, and like who knows, in a year of doing work on themselves, them coming back together, I don't know what that would look like. But it does feel like right now they are triggering each other.
I hope for both of them they let go.
I think so too.
One thing I didn't ask Shayne, and Natalie's statement slightly contradicted, and I wish I would have asked him. I didn't ask like who, and all these like reconciliations, whether it was 2 or 4, honestly, like to me that sounds like semantics. Like,
yeah, because I think it was also like maybe a differentiation between romantic and like hangouts versus.
Yeah, Shayne might have been like, we talked about it 4 different times, and Natalie might be like, well, we only really got into it twice, type of thing. To me, I don't really care about that truth, so to speak.
Mhm.
They clearly try to get back together. That's the big takeaway. Like 2 or 4, I'm not gonna be like, well, then you're a liar, Shayne, or you're a liar, Natalie. Like I think they wanted to get back together. Shayne really made it seem like at the end of the day it was mutual in the sense that they both seemed to have a mutual interest of considering getting back together, and it seemed, I took it as ultimately a mutual, like, this is going to work out. Now that doesn't mean at times both of them like might have tried and the other person might have pushed back, but I didn't really ask that, and I just assumed it was generally mutual, where Natalie implies at least that it was more her decision. And I would be curious. That's something I wish I would have got clarification from Shayne.
Yeah, I mean, it's so tough, and I think that you're right though, that the goal should be for these 2 people to move on with other people, because I think at this point they have so much baggage with each other and so much hurt there.
It's
and what you really, I loved what you really focused on with Shayne when he said that, she made him feel bad about himself. And you were like, well, you shouldn't be with someone where that's how you feel.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily even think that that's Natalie's fault. I think that it's just the reality of how he felt when he was with her. And that's probably some stuff he's got to work through. That's probably some like self-esteem stuff. But like a huge thing to look for in a relationship is not just who is this other person, but how does this person make you feel when you're around them?
100%. And we talk about this a lot. And I think Natalie and Shayne are a perfect example. And I think it's important for people listening to remember is that 2 generally good people can be bad for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And people all the time can bring out the worst in each other.
Yeah.
Now, when you introduce heightened other variables like being on a TV show and having the opinions of like random people talk about yourselves and your relationship, that can add to the toxicity of the relationship. And I'd like to think that both Natalie and Shayne are both generally well-intentioned good people with flaws they both need to work on. That all of us. And that them together is a toxic situation, and that if they were to stubbornly refuse to accept the reality that maybe they aren't good for each other, they can bring out the worst in each other. They can look like people who aren't great if they continue to surround each other with the other person. And I think that happens in life all the time. I did ask, because I just got to do my job. The invite to Natalie has been extended.
Ooh.
I've been told, and I want to make sure I'm respecting all parties, but I'll just keep it a little cryptic and just say it's not happening right now.
Okay.
I've been led to believe that there's a strong possibility that it could happen at the appropriate time, whenever that might be. So and as a podcast host who wants the juicy story, obviously I'd want that. If I'm being honest, if I were a friend to Natalie and or Shayne, if someone were to come to me and say, specifically Natalie, do you think I should do Nick's podcast or any podcast? I mean, if she doesn't do, if she wants to do a podcast and if she is able to do a podcast, someone's going to want her on. So that's, and if I were a friend of Natalie and they were to, and she were to say, do you think I should go on and elaborate on my truth? I would probably tell her no.
Really?
As a friend to Natalie, what I would say to her is, well, one, you have, she released a statement. She put some stuff out there. And while it might be juicy, I would ask her, like, what is your goal? Like, what do you want to accomplish by going on? Because whatever you say at this point, it's just he said, she said. If it's just Natalie talking about Shayne without Shayne being there, it's just her version of the truth. And I have no doubt that Natalie would be very believable, but can she speak on everything? Maybe not. Maybe there's limitations of what she can speak on as it relates to because she's on the show. So that stops it for being like a full interview potentially. And I would, no matter what she says, I would think that she most likely would leave disappointed because you have this desire for everyone to believe you, and there's just no way everyone's going to believe her. And it always seems like the criticism is louder than the compliments. So even if most people will think, oh, Natalie, you're a queen and we believe you, and there's a lot of people who believe Natalie, but I think both Natalie and Shayne are hearing the criticism more than they're hearing the praise. And I think that won't change for Natalie if she does any podcast, because at this point, it's just people are going to believe what they want to believe. What I do think she should do is I think the only productive way of doing this is to have Natalie and Shayne on together and like a mediation of some sort.
I'd watch that.
I honestly think that would be.
But then again,
better.
It gets to what's the goal of that though? To declare a winner, because I don't feel like that's a good goal for either of them to have.
We do these mediation calls
right.
on our Going Deeper episode. And the goal of those calls is to not have a winner. It's not, as some of our listeners suggested when we first started the segment of like the Viall trials. Is my goal would be, because I do think there's a lot of mutual respect and love between the two. I don't think either of them enjoy seeing the other person hurt. I believe that. I want to believe that. And so my goal, if I were, and I'm essentially pitching them right now because they're going to hear it, is that you could do nothing. You could let it die down. That's option number one, to just go your separate ways. You don't give any podcasts the pleasure of having them on and have people get involved. That's one option. And that is, as a friend to both of them, a solid option. Like, just let it go away. Let it die down. Go live your lives. You're not going to change everyone's mind. You can't have everyone love you. Or if you want your truth heard, just go on together and work it out. And in that way, it's not he said, she said. It's like, no, come on, let's find the truth. Let's get to a place where you guys can just reconcile, put the truths out there. Maybe there's some debate on what's going on. But I do think ultimately they could leave feeling, I think the audience could leave feeling like they just heard what is the actual truth. And I think both Shayne and Natalie could leave feeling like they didn't win or they didn't lose, but they feel heard. Because I think ultimately both these people want to feel heard. I think that's the goal. And I think they can both feel heard without feeling like they won or lost, and still feeling like the other person was respected. I think that's the only, if they're going to do a podcast, I think that as a friend is the only way they should do it. Because if Natalie does it, she's going to want to come on. She's going to want to come on guns a-blazing like Shayne did. And when she does the interview, whether it's with me or someone else, she'll probably feel really good about it. And then she'll get anxiety between the time where she records it and it airs. And then when it airs, there'll be hot takes.
Yeah. And
all the criticism of any criticism, and I don't care if it's 10 people or 40 or 40,000 of, it's going to feel like a lot. And she most likely will regret it no matter how it goes or what is said, is because at this point, it's how do we know who to believe?
No, I think that's a great idea. And it also sort of resets, right? Because if they come on together, then you're not waiting for the next response.
Yeah.
Because you had them respond at the same time.
Because no matter now, because honestly, when I suppose I was naive when I interviewed Shayne, he was talking a lot about Natalie, and that was just like, and I asked him, does Natalie know you're going to say this stuff? But I took him at his word, and I guess I didn't suspect Natalie would Natalie flat out called him a liar, you know? So then it's kind of like, what's true? And so
I also feel like at this point with their relationship, how much does it matter what's true that's happened in the past versus them having an opportunity to sort of potentially work through their issues with each other in real time and then move forward, right? And so like giving it kind of like a final chapter, like almost like that not that I think people need closure, but just that sense of like, okay, this is our final time talking about this. This is our final hopes for each other. This is how this relationship has changed me and what my takeaways are from it. But I think if the goal of that conversation was, you ran away on the beach. No, I didn't. You ran, then it's like you don't even get, like getting to the truth of it. I don't think we'll ever get to the truth of it because I think they have totally different truths.
I totally agree. And I think if they either of them keep doing podcasts as individuals talking about this story, neither of them will feel satisfied. Neither of them will feel like their truth is really out there, and they'll keep feeling like they have to defend their truth. So I think the only option is to do it together or not at all. As a friend,
that's a very convincing argument. I'm convinced.
Because I feel like if Natalie were listening to this for a friend, the suggestion that she does it with Shayne, her immediate response would be, no fucking way.
Right.
That would be the immediate reaction. But I think if you sit back and think about it, it makes a lot of sense. So
it really does.
If you're listening, Shayne, Natalie.
How did you...
Two-person couch right there.
How did you get to be okay with the idea of people not knowing your truth? That accepting that there's parts of things that happened and there's stories that people just don't know and that your version of it is never going to be fully known?
That's a great question. It's a great question. One, for me personally, constantly reminding myself that what other people think of me is none of my business. Which is a weird truth.
Yeah.
Being someone who is on some levels in the public eye.
You
because
definitely
my
are.
job on some level is to care what people think of me, or the show. And it's a balance. You want to hear your audience and you want to hear their feedback. But as I kind of we'll talk to Allie and Amanda, too much, it can handcuff you. Ultimately, my job, as I see it on this show, and ultimately their job as being a part of the show now, is to have thoughtful conversations that get people thinking, and you want people to care. We don't want people not to care about this show.
Right.
And someone disagreeing or hating me, while personally, that's not my favorite thing.
It's uncomfortable.
Is not a bad thing as it relates to this show. They just have to have an interest. And that can be very hard to do. On a personal level, I just remind myself that if you can't go around and ask people, if people were to say, just pull 100 people who have interacted with you, what do you think of Allison? What do you think of Nick? If everyone likes you, then you're not being your most authentic self in public. Because if you're just being yourself and not constantly worried about what other people think or constantly worried about whether you're being the most considerate and most polite person, you're going to say or do things that maybe rub people the wrong way. People who are in their own thoughts and feelings, who are having their own good days and bad days, who are projecting their own emotions onto you, and you're going to disappoint people sometimes. So I just think that's the big thing. And so the question you have to ask yourself is, do you want to be your most authentic self, or do you just want to be generally liked? And I think I kind of have that conversation with myself and just try to be, I want to be a good person. I want to have good character. To me, I really challenge, what do you do when people aren't looking or paying attention? I want to be able to answer those questions, the people I love, and my parents and my friends and my partner, And I want to be able to answer to them about my decisions, about who I am as a person. And I prioritize that over answering
To everyone.
anyone, whether it's my audience or just people I interact with. And that doesn't mean that I can't still improve things. You know, like I'm aloof. I'm an introvert. I'm in my head. I worry a lot. I overthink. And with that, I'm someone, even before I was in the public eye, I was tall. And being a tall person, people just notice you in public. So when you have like a resting bitch face, or you're not like being social with people in public, people will have opinions of you, right? Now, that's bothered me. I've been insecure about that. And those are things I try to work on. But it's a fine line between working on them and crippling myself with worrying about if everyone doesn't like me or if everyone hates me. Does that make sense?
No, totally. I mean, I came up on the internet.
How do you do it?
Yeah, it's challenging. It's also challenging, right? Because you're constantly growing and changing. So who they're seeing on the internet or in the public might feel like, oh, that's not what I expect of you, but it's like because you're no longer that person. And I think for me, it's really been feeling like, oh, okay, not everyone, I'm choosing what I share of myself. I'm choosing, like, accepting that, like, even though I try to be really authentic, like, it's always curated because I'm not just being followed around by a camera 24/7. I'm deciding what I'm putting out there and what I'm not putting out there, and people react to it. But I think the thing that's really helped me is, like, I try to be like, everyone has different standards of how they want to live their life. And if you try to live your life to everyone else's standards, you'll fail because, one, you don't know what they are, and two, everyone has different ones, right? So how can you meet everyone's standards? And I think it's really like what you said, where I have to create my own standards for how I want to live my life. And then I live it, and then that will bump up against some people, and for other people it'll align with how they want to. But I mean, accepting that, like, people don't ever fully know you and that you don't ever fully know anyone. You just have to sort of be comfortable with who you are and be okay with the idea that, like, our perceptions of things are vastly different than other people's.
Totally. I mean, when we hear like reactions to interviews like Shayne's, like, I don't know these people, but it's so obvious that it seems like with some of the reactions, just the way they're written or how visceral the reactions are, that people are projecting their own lives and what's going on. We, like, a lot of times reactions from things we see on reality TV are often, and people even say in the comments, this person reminds me of so-and-so. I've dated a guy like this. I've dated a woman like so-and-so. And we will watch these people and decide that we know these people because of certain characteristics we might have seen in our partner. And there might be some truth to that, but that's a very, we need to be, that's a leap. We need to be very careful when we do that. But it's our way of trying to understand our own choices. I think that's why people love, like, these reality TV shows so much, especially about love.
Yeah.
As we see ourselves not only in the heroes but in the villains. And the reason I think sometimes we're so quick to criticize people, it's easier to criticize other people than criticize ourselves. And if we criticize other people, I think that's our subconscious letting us know that we're checking ourselves without really fully looking in the mirror. You know, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think a lot of times the things that we don't like about ourselves is what we dislike the most in other people.
Yeah.
And so, like, if something is really, you're having this, like, visceral reaction to something, being like, oh, do I do that? You know, like, having the accountability to be like, why am I having such a strong reaction to this?
I think when you meet people in life that other people see, they're like, oh, so-and-so is kind of similar to you. You either love them or hate them.
Yeah.
There's no middle ground. You're like, that's my ride or die, or like, I don't know, I fucking hate that person. And then other people are just like, I don't know, you guys are kind of the same.
Well, it's a window into how other people perceive you.
Yeah.
Right? Because you don't really know how someone perceives you. But if they're like, oh, you're just like this, then you're like, oh, you see me that way. And sometimes that can be, like, very startling and upsetting.
Yeah. But final thoughts, Natalie, Shayne, if you're listening, if you're still interested, and if you're ever allowed, we'd love to have you both on. I will take Natalie on her own. I will. And I would.
She sits down. You're like, this is a mistake for you to be here.
As a friend, this is bad for the show, but I'll take her.
Yeah.
And I just think if she were to call me up like straight friend, I'd be like, I don't know how much upside there is at this point for you to go on a podcast by yourself, regardless of the podcast, and share your truth about you and Shayne. I feel like you're not going to finish happy. I think there is a happy solution to, having them both on.
Should they talk to each other before they both come on?
I don't think they should. If they were to call me up, like if I were to like talk to their people or whatever, I would ask them to not do that. I mean, according to this, it sounds like Natalie might call up Shayne and be like, let's get our stories straight. None of that. I would prefer not to have that happen. I would be transparent with them about stuff I'd want to ask them.
You'd share questions ahead of time?
Sure. I don't want this to feel like a gotcha thing. I really don't want someone. I would feel really good about having them on and both feeling like when it's done, not in the middle because there would be some awkwardness or whatever, but when it's done, they both feel, and the audience generally take away is, you know what? I believe them both and I don't believe them both, but I think they're solid people who probably shouldn't be dating. And that's all that really matters. That would be my hope.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the middle, there'd be some great uncomfortable moments that people would enjoy listening, but that would be my goal. And I'd ultimately want it to be like any other mediation call we've ever had. So.
And for them to have a sense of like, and now let's move on with both of our lives.
Yeah. All right, Allie, what do we got for any updates on Bachelor World that we need to keep our audience in the loop of?
I mean, Bachelor World is just, it's like a lot of almost shorter snippets. There's not, huge things going on. There's obviously Bachelor in Paradise talk of who wants to see who, none of which is super surprising. I'm going to do like a very quick rundown of some happy couple updates.
Oh, yay!
Andy Dorfman is engaged.
Yeah.
Abigail and Noah are now living together in Huntington Beach, so their long distance is done. Katie and John are also living together. They have a van, and they're kind of co-parenting Tommy.
Who's Tommy?
The cat.
Are they living in the van?
I don't know. I don't think so. But the van's name is Leroy.
Okay.
Just fun tidbit for you. Joe and Serena are moving to New York, despite him telling Kendall he would never leave Chicago. Chris and Alana are still together and are traveling. Hannah Brown and her boyfriend.
Wait, let's go back to where's this accusation of Joe saying he never would leave Chicago?
That was his whole thing with Kendall.
If it was more like I didn't like living in LA.
Oh, I thought it was my family's in Chicago. This is where I'm at.
That's one of those.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think it's one of those. Like if it was the Joe and Kendall mediation, I wouldn't be shocked if
they have different opinions.
They have different truths, but I think the biggest takeaway is Joe didn't like living in LA, and Kendall didn't want to live in Chicago. Also, things change, and maybe the long distance was a big reason why they broke up, but deep down wasn't the reason. It's just easier to say that rather than saying, I don't like you.
I got the sense that it was that he was willing to go to LA for her, but she wasn't willing to budge at all for him, more so than the city itself.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, they weren't each other's person.
Yeah.
Because we have a mediation call that deals with this exact topic about moving. And it's like, even though the two people were on completely different sides of where they want to live spectrum, they were still so
you make it
steadfast.
Work.
They were together. There was no question about breaking up. So I think it's sort of, it might add the stakes or timing pressure to incompatibilities, but they were there before the conversation came up.
I think the long distance or the locations was a big role for sure, but I think there were.
But I think that again, who the hell knows? I could be completely wrong, but I feel like it was, again, back to that willingness, that one of them was willing to do something, had made this sacrifice, and the other person was like, my way or the highway.
100%. You always just, when you feel like you're compromising, the other person's not, you take a kind of a mental inventory.
Right.
For sure. What else we got?
Chris and Alana are still together and traveling. Hannah Brown and her boyfriend moved in together, and I just checked, does not follow the brother's fiance.
Doesn't follow the brother's fiance.
And Hannah G and Dylan are in Italy looking at wedding venues.
Ooh.
Happy for all of them.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
A lot of
Yeah.
happy couples in the nation right now.
Hannah's still not.
I just checked on my phone. No.
I DM'd Hannah and asked if she wanted to, her and her boyfriend wanted to come on the podcast. She didn't respond. But I wanted to ask, I'm dying to get an answer. Have you been following that story at all?
No, I haven't. What is it?
Hannah Brown's brother
Uh-huh.
is now engaged to the woman that Jed was hanging out with
What?
prior to Jed coming on the. You did not know this?
How did I not know that?
This is a big deal.
Yeah.
I've been recovering from knee surgery and been a little out of the loop. That's my one
Yeah.
excuse. But this is bananas.
Yeah, and we've covered it at nauseum,
Yeah.
so we won't get into too much. But Hannah does not follow her on Instagram.
I would also say she doesn't follow Hannah.
That-
It's not a.
That's-
There's no mutuals happening.
How could that have
She doesn't
possibly
follow Hannah
happened?
because Hannah doesn't follow her. I'm convinced of, but I couldn't like. I haven't always been 100% team Hannah Brown with certain topics, but I am 100% team Hannah Brown on this. But anyway,
um,
and it's also like it's a deliberate not follow. You don't not follow someone's.
I guess maybe I don't know enough of the context, but like, what did this girl do wrong?
I don't think she did anything wrong. I think it's not a coincidence.
Oh, you think that she went after her brother?
I just think, yeah, I don't believe in coincidence all that much.
Mm.
And I don't know who went after who. I don't know. But like, she was doing interviews when the whole Jed stuff came out. And I think that means she likes, obviously, she didn't have to go do an interview. And that's fine if she did. But clearly, if you go on The Bachelor, you like attention. If you start doing interviews, you like it. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's fine. But I'm just saying, I would be skeptical of Hannah. If I'm Hannah Brown, I would have a lot of skepticism about the access this girl now has to Hannah.
Mm.
And that would make me, if I'm Hannah, slightly uncomfortable. And maybe it's all well-intentioned on her part, but I would, I don't know. They're just,
It's awkward.
it would make me uneasy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Is that all the Bachelor updates?
Kind of all the updates I got. Everyone seems like they're just kind of chilling.
I want to transition to your book, Allison. Overthinking About You. Love the title.
Thank you.
I also love the topic. Why did you write this book? Essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's a book about dating relationships and people who suffer from mental health struggles like ADHD, anxiety, who maybe have a habit of ruminating, and self-sabotage. I think a lot of people relate to that. I do. And how did you come to write this book, and what are the big takeaways that might attract people to picking this up and consuming it?
Yeah, I mean, mental health has always been a big part of my life. I actually got OCD when I was 4 years old.
Oh, wow.
So it's always been a constant. And I think that regardless of what was going on in my life, romantic relationships were always my biggest trigger. That like nothing could make my mental stability fall apart faster than like some sort of romantic issue or rejection or breakup or problem. And I also was really unable to date in a healthy way. So I was being my worst self constantly. Like I did all of the things that we all have maybe done of tracking my ex-boyfriend's Instagram activity, of assuming if someone doesn't call me back immediately, they hate me, I'm never going to see them again, of like really letting my anxiety and my symptoms really interfere with the relationship. And then a few years ago, I realized that suddenly my relationship with dating was different. Like I had done this work on myself where I like had better coping skills. I had more self-esteem. I had a better vocabulary to be able to explain how my disorders manifest in my life. So I could like better articulate that to my partner. So like they could better understand me and not make like harmful assumptions. And I was like, well, this is really interesting. I kind of want to share that this is possible, that like you can kind of like, I don't think it doesn't mean you don't have anxiety, you don't have OCD anymore, but it doesn't need to negatively affect you in the same way in this area of your life. And so I was like, I want to write about that. And at first it really started as like, let me share my story. And then I was like, that's not helpful enough. I want to like blow it out and make it more relatable and more, helpful and to people. So the book is actually filled with all of these expert interviews with different mental health professionals, psychiatrists, sex therapists, psychotherapists, also some dating coaches, some real life couples. And we're talking about things like, how do you get over a breakup better? What effects might medication have in your romantic relationships? Because one of the main side effects from SSRIs is, sexual side effects. How do you talk about that with a partner? Things like, how do you know what's really you versus your disorder? So you can sort of figure out, is my anxiety about this person real and something I should be paying attention to? Or is this relationship anxiety?
Sure.
And diving into all of that.
I opened up and it was chapter 4, how to talk about mental health with your partner. One question I get a lot in relationships, whether it's mental health, whether it's just real personal information.
Mm-hmm.
When do I talk about that stuff? How quickly? First date, second date, third date, 2 months in? As it relates to mental health and stuff you talk about in this book, what is advice that you have or things that you might have learned from some of the experts you interviewed in terms of how to best navigate it and when is the best time to have some of these conversations?
It's such a great question. And I think, unfortunately, it's not like on date 3 at 1 hour in, I think what it's each relationship is specific, but what you really need to pay attention to is what stage in the relationship are you at? And that can look different for different timelines, but what kind of conversations are you having with this person? So if you're just having conversations that are pretty surface level, where you're just sort of like sharing funny work stories and you haven't really gotten into anything deeper and you're just like going bowling and fine, you don't need to share that maybe you've had a past suicide attempt.
Mm-hmm.
That's maybe not the time. But if you're getting into conversations with this person that are deeper, where you are having things where you're really sharing your history, sharing your life, then suddenly to not talk about your mental health history is an omission in a way. So I think really paying attention to are we getting more serious? Are we having these deeper conversations? Then, okay, now it does feel like maybe I am purposefully withholding this versus it's not time yet. And then I think the other really big thing to think about is how you share it. Because we're a very verbal society, but as humans, we also pick up a lot on body language and we pick up a lot on energy. And so putting in some thought into when am I going to share this stuff? And, you don't share it at a really busy restaurant where the waiter is interrupting you 10 times during the course of the conversation. You kind of want to share these heavier things in a safe space where it's calm, where you feel calm, where you feel like you're sharing it because you have made the decision to share it, not that you're sharing it compulsively. Because I think that there is this sense, and I used to do this, where it was like, let me tell you all of my shit right away, so then you can either reject me or not.
Mm-hmm.
But
you want to get to the acceptance point faster.
Exactly. But being able to sit and be like, no, I'm sharing this because I've decided to share it, not that oh my God, I feel like this has to come out of me right now.
As someone who ruminates and overthinks, when you're talking about that, another question that came up is, what are some best practices, I guess, for the people who they know they have something to share, and maybe it's as severe as an attempted suicide, or maybe it's just, some insecurity we have that at some point I want to know this person accepts me for this.
Right.
And maybe it's just I'm a forgetful person. Something like that. And we just in our past relationship, our ex constantly complained about that.
Right.
So we know it's an issue. How do you compartmentalize? Thank you. And to say, all right, it's the first date. We're going out to a bar. Maybe this isn't the time to bring X, Y, or Z up. How do I set that aside? So that I can have a conversation, an organic conversation. I can sit down and say, I'm going to see where this conversation goes. I have some questions I want to learn about this person, things I want to focus on getting to know. And how do I focus on that as opposed to constantly worrying about, is this going to come up? You know what I'm saying? Because as someone who ruminates and thinks, you're always just you're on high alert of waiting for that window. It's like, oh, I'm going to wait for the right time. Because when I asked you that question, you're like, well, there's a time and a place. So maybe kind of suss out the conversation. So as a ruminator, I'm thinking, you know what I'm going to be thinking about? As I'm going to find that window. It's kind of like a game of hopscotch where you're just like, when's the right time to go on? And so instead of listening and actively participating in a conversation, I'm more focused on when I can sneak this in at the best time when it's going to be best received. Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
Oh, it makes total sense.
And so do you have any best practices of how someone who might relate to that concern, how they can try to set that aside and actively participate and stay present, especially in the first and second date where it's so important to ask questions and focus on whether you even like that person rather than being accepted by the person you don't even know at all?
Well, I think you just really touched on it. Like I think a lot of us with trauma in our past or also with, these various disorders, it feels like we've got to take what we can get. It's like, okay, if we just got to find somebody that's got to accept us. We've got to find somebody that's going to be okay with us. But in reality, we deserve to be just as picky as anybody else. And so I think going into the conversations more like, I'm gathering information too. I'm figuring out if I like this person. Like, this isn't all about whether or not they're going to like me. This is a two-way street. And my energy is best served sussing them out and deciding if they're worthy of me even sharing this part of myself with them.
Yeah, I love that. I always kind of remind people, it's just like, dating's hard.
Mm-hmm.
There's a good chance that any of these first or second dates you're going on won't turn into like your person. So just be careful how much personal information you share with someone who might not be in your life 3 or 4 months from now.
And also, we always look at it like, okay, this is me, Allison, sharing with Nick, right? And so what's really important is that Nick is learning about Allison in that moment. But really, I'm learning about you in that moment when I'm sharing because I'm learning how you respond to what I'm telling you.
Oh, sure.
And like that is a really revealing moment of like, are they holding space for you? Are they, letting you be vulnerable? Do you say to them, hey, I'm on medication for my depression. They go, cool, do you want another drink? Or do they like ask another question? Like how they respond to that information will tell you a lot about that person. And if there's someone you should even continue to share with or spend time with.
100%. Shameless plug, I do have a section in my book that actually talks about like pay attention to the questions people ask you on dates.
Mm-hmm.
You gave a perfect example. It's just like if they're not asking you follow-up questions, oh, why is that? That's really interesting. Tell me more. Then you can tell that they're not actually interested in getting to know you. And you might be able to determine whether someone's motives. We're always worried about people's motives on first dates. Do they really like me? Are they just using me for X, Y, and Z? And by paying attention to what people do ask you or their level of interest. And I think we don't do that because we're so worried about what they think of us that we're just so quick to give up our power to complete strangers because of our fear of not being validated or liked or insecure about whatever our insecurities are.
And I think it's just like it's a huge reframe of dating to instead of viewing it as approval or disapproval, to look at it as a compatibility check of like, you're not going to be compatible with everybody. That doesn't mean that you have some huge flaw. That doesn't mean that they're rejecting you. Like if you instead just say, I'm just trying to find someone I fit with, then I think you can be a lot kinder to yourself when you happen to just not fit with more people.
Yeah. It's as I always say, it seems so simple in theory, but so hard
in practice.
Yeah. It's a fascinating thing because it really, so many variables that kind of go on into like how we react to certain things and we have to try not to have every first date to be, we have to learn to let things go and let our past go and learn. It's like that balance of how do we learn from mistakes, but not carry that weight into new ones. And it's such a struggle.
I mean, I had a really unique experience while writing this book in that I actually got engaged while I was writing it.
Ooh.
And I was like, oh, amazing. 1, this is my dream come true. I've wanted to be married my entire life. And 2, now like when my book comes out, I can be like, hey, I can do it and so can you. Like after a decade of really struggling to date, of having all of these horrible habits, I locked down a man. And then 6 months later, he walked out on me with like no explanation, pretty much.
Really?
And it was this like really horrible experience, but it was also this like, I ended up kind of being the first guinea pig of all the lessons in the book. Whereas like in the past, I would have internalized that rejection as like saying something really specific about me, that I was someone that deserved to be left, that that I wasn't good enough, that it was like this huge rejection of me as a person. But sort of like using all of the stuff I'd learned in therapy and like through the course of researching this book, instead I was able to just focus on the grief. And I think that that's a thing that we don't do enough, is like when you lose somebody, even like after the first date, when you're just losing the fantasy of them, it's like there's like two things to it. There's like the grief and then there's the pain of the rejection. And I think that the more people can just like focus on the grief and that like honoring that you lost something really wonderful potentially, or maybe you thought it was wonderful, but looking back, maybe it wasn't, And
Well, I like you say, people confuse being sad about something
mm-hmm.
and with it being right for you.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, you can lose and grieve something and still maybe be better off for it.
Yeah. And it's just like sometimes I think if we're sad about it, then we have to tell ourselves that we have to have it back.
Mm-hmm.
Or if we're not, or we have to tell ourselves that it meant nothing.
Yeah.
Or, it's like those extremes. But to your point, we can honor something, feel sad about it, be sad that it ended. We can acknowledge that it meant a lot to us.
Mm-hmm. And like we look at like, oh, it was a waste of time, right? Like if it didn't last forever, then it was this like huge waste of time. And that suddenly like these years of memories you have with somebody, you can't even look back on those years of your life because it's too painful, or what was the point of having that great day if you're not going to be with that person when you're 90?
Yeah.
And I think that was something I really struggled with. And like I think a lot of people with anxiety, it is that black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking, and to have to do a lot of like work to be like, it's possible that I had a wonderful relationship with somebody and it also didn't last forever.
Mm-hmm.
And it also ended in a really harmful, hurtful way. But that I think when I was younger, because it ended in a harmful, hurtful way, I would have immediately gone to, he never loved me. It was all a lie. But to be able to be like, he did love me. And then he fell out of love with me. And then that really hurt.
That's really hard to...
It's hard.
To do.
It's really hard.
Yeah. When you told that story, it made me feel better because not too long ago, like I said, I have a book coming out. It's not out yet. And I'm having certain people I know and trust read it. I just want to get some feedback. And then obviously my team's reading it and things like that. And one person in my circle said to me, because I talk about my girlfriend, Natalie, I name her. She's the only person like I name. Like I don't give a lot of names. I give one name of an ex, change the name.
Yeah. A lot of aliases in my book.
Yeah. So I name her. And they were just like, hey, are you alone? And I'm like, yeah. They're like, any consideration of just taking Natalie's name out of the book and referring to her as your girlfriend? I'm like, well, what do you mean? Well, just, and this, again, keep in mind, this is a person whose job it is to look after me.
Mm-hmm.
Think big picture, And so they're like, well, I mean, the book's not coming out until October. What if you guys break up? And my response was, well, then we break up.
Yeah.
Like everything and truthfully, everything I'm writing about in this book, I would utilize. I'd probably go back and read and remember and try to take my own advice.
Right.
Because it wouldn't take away from anything I said about Natalie. Because I talk about I use examples of things that are going positive in my relationship, things I've learned. And so a lot of what I talk about is just like, I used to do this, and now thankfully with my current girlfriend, we do this, and it's great. And so the thought and the fear is, well, what if you guys break up? Will it make all those things you said untrue? And to my response, I would say, absolutely not. In fact, I could argue that it would be a bigger selling point if I was that if we did break up, I could speak to that, because I hate how being in a relationship for so many people, other people deem you as successful in love just because you have somebody rather than the right person. And everything I talked about that I enjoy from that relationship, if Natalie would wake up and break up with me tomorrow and just disappear and like hurt me, it wouldn't change what I appreciate about the relationship. And there would be things that in my next relationship I would look for. And it wouldn't change anything I said in the book. And I love that you I don't love that you had to live through that while writing
Right.
it, but I love that it doesn't cheapen anything you wrote. And if anything, it validated what in fact you did wrote, and you could put it to practice.
I mean, I had a really interesting experience where he left during the book writing process. So I actually did have to heavily rewrite the book because of it. But also the way that my book was framed, like I think what you're talking about, you wouldn't. But for me, the original last chapter was entitled "How Do You Make a Relationship Last?" And it like had this whole interview with my ex-fiance, and it was sort of from this place of like, look, I did it, and the same thing of like, and this is how. Look at how successful I am, And then, and he was throughout the book and all of this stuff. And then when he left in November 2020, like, luckily for me, I was still in a place where I was about to do the second rewrite. And so I had to completely lose that last chapter. But then I changed it to "How do you not give up?" And it was like really this takeaway of like my worst fear. Like if you had ever asked me, what is your worst fear? It would literally be, you get engaged, you announce it to everyone in the world. You're so jazzed about it. And then they leave simply because they don't want to be with you. Simply because they have fallen out of love with you.
Yeah.
Nightmare fear. Not that like I did anything. I think his explanation was simply something is missing. Right. And so that's like, for an anxious mind, that's worst case scenario.
It sounds so useless.
Because then you're filling in what is that something. And it's so easy to fill it in with every insecurity, every fear. Oh, something's missing. I'm not pretty enough. Something's missing. I'm not funny enough. Something's, like, what is that something? And to like, the fact that I was able to not do that was like, again, that testament of like me using the things that I had written in the book. But there was this very, at the time, tragic, but I also could understand funny thing of like my poor editor having to go through the draft and just like highlight every time I mentioned my fiance, and like so I could go in and like edit it or make it, rechange it a little bit.
Very therapeutic, I would imagine.
It really was. You know what's so interesting is everyone in my life's reaction, for the most part, was, you dodged a bullet. That if this happened, this would have happened no matter what. That like, thank God it didn't happen when you were already married or when you had kids. That like, if somebody has the capacity to walk out on you in that way, they would have always done it at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And I really disagreed with that. I really think that, as I've said already 100 times on the show, context matters so much. And I have no idea what would have happened if there hadn't been a pandemic. Maybe he would have walked out on me no matter what. But all I know is like in this version of life, which is the only version I'm consciously aware of, that's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I think playing this game of like, this was inevitable, really rang false to me. And I think instead I was like, I just had to grieve instead of being upset about the pandemic, instead of being like, I think at the beginning it was really hard for me to accept because it really felt like the pandemic had a big part in it. But then at a certain point I became, this is the reality I'm living in. This is what ended up happening. And how do I move forward from here?
You almost said it at first like as a way to not take accountability for the breakup. And not you, but I mean like just accepting the breakup. And then the way you articulated it, it was quite the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
It was more like, it just happened.
Right.
And because it happened, I'm just going to learn how to accept it rather than obsess why it happened.
Right.
Because
you can obsess over why it happened.
Yeah.
I mean, I think some breakups, there are clear takeaways. Like somebody can give you feedback. You're like, oh, okay, I really need to work this into how I'm going to change in my next relationship. I was given no feedback. I was given something is missing. So there wasn't anything for me to really latch onto other than just accepting that it was over and then moving forward. And I'm in a new relationship. Like we live together. I'm very happy. Like I think the thing I'm most proud of is that having this like betrayal and hurt I didn't close off after it. I think it would have been really easy for me to give up and to be like, oh, this is my worst case scenario happened. I can't possibly put myself out there again. But I didn't want my ex's decision to continue to influence my life, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, I'm someone who's always wanted to be married and have a long-term partner. And so I didn't want this one person's decision. Like, already he took away my future with him. He took away the future I'd had. And so I kind of wanted the power to stop there. And like, I didn't want it to then affect the future I was going to then build on my own.
Yeah, not only does it make sense, I think it's a great takeaway just because I think so many of us, I mean, all of us at some point, and so many of us to this day, allow our exes to have so much influence
Yes.
in our current lives, even though they're not in it.
Mm-hmm.
And more importantly, they're not even asking for it
Right.
sometimes. And we give it to them so often. And that's a really hard thing to do. Allison, thank you so much for joining us. This is a great topic. It's been a ton of fun going through all the Love is Blind Bachelor. And this is a really fascinating topic. So make sure to check out Allison's book, Overthinking About You, available wherever you buy books.
Available on May 3rd. So
It's not even out yet.
We're in the pre-order stage of it all.
Go pre-order this book.
And if you pre-order, then you get like exclusive merchandise too. And so we are always, as you know, so thankful for a pre-order. It kind of makes or breaks the books.
Go. My book's not out till October, so go ahead and pre-order Allison's first.
Can I share one more thing?
Yeah, please.
My sister Jocelyn is maybe your biggest fan on earth.
Tell Jocelyn I said hi.
Thank you.
Shout out to Jocelyn. Thank you so much for coming. Pre-order Overthinking About You.
Yes.
We will put a link in our show description. And it's incredibly fascinating. Or else can they find you on social?
Yeah, so I'm at Allison Raskin on social. I also have a mental health Instagram account called @Emotional Support Lady, which is also a Substack. And then my podcast is called Just Between Us.
Awesome. Anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Anywhere you listen.
Anywhere you listen to podcasts. So check that out. You're such a wonderful guest.
Thank you so much for
coming. Thank you for listening, guys. Don't forget, tomorrow, Cindy Eckhart talking about women's sexuality, being horny, I guess. I don't know. And are there things we can do about it? And is the pharmaceutical industry keeping doing some shady
keeping
things?
The orgasm gap alive.
Yeah, keeping the orgasm gap alive. Well said. Well, I can't wait to talk to Cindy. I think it's going to be really fascinating. So make sure you check that out. Subscribe, review. Go check out Justin Long and Ask Nick. Bye. Hey guys, thanks for watching, but before you go, make sure you like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you don't miss any future videos, like our Mondays Ask Nick, especially if you're looking for some relationship stories and relationship advice, as well as our Wednesday interviews with your favorite celebrities and experts. See you next time.